The first thing I noticed when I walked through the door was the television. It was past 11 at night. The volume turned up so loud I could feel it in my chest. Some late-night talk show with canned laughter bouncing off the walls. Every light in the living room was on. The kitchen smelled like something had been fried and left to sit. And there, stretched across my sofa, the one I'd had since Gerald passed, was my son-in-law Derek, in his socks, a bag of chips balanced on his stomach. I stood in the doorway still wearing my coat, my feet aching in a way that made every step feel like broken glass, and I watched him not notice me for a full 30 seconds. He didn't look up. I was 64 years old, and I had just finished a 7-hour shift on cash at the Walmart on Boule des Laurentides. My lower back had stopped hurting somewhere around hour 4, which I'd learned meant the nerves had simply given up. My uniform smelled like the deli counter. My knees, which my doctor had been asking me about for 2 years, had swollen up inside my compression socks. I set my bag down by the door and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The sink was full of dishes. My name is Dorothy. I live in Laval, Quebec, and for 3 years and 2 months, to be precise, I let my daughter and her family move into my house and slowly disappear into it until there was almost no room left for me. I want to tell you how it happened. Not because I'm proud of it, but because I think some of you already know exactly what I'm talking about, and nobody ever says it out loud. My daughter Carol is 41 years old. She's always been the kind of person who could talk her way into or out of anything. When she was 16, she convinced me she needed a car for school when the bus stop was 2 blocks away. When she was 28, she borrowed $4,000 to cover a gap between jobs and paid back $2,000 of it, and never mentioned the rest again. I never brought it up either. That's the kind of mother I was, the kind who kept a running tab in her heart but never handed anyone the bill. She married Derek 9 years ago. He's the sort of man who has strong opinions about things he doesn't fully understand. He'd been in sales, then flooring installation, then something to do with cryptocurrency that I never quite followed. When Carol called me in October 3 years ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table doing a crossword and drinking tea, and she said, "Maman, we're in a bit of a situation." The situation was that they'd been renting a duplex in Saint-Jérôme, and the landlord was selling the building, and they had 60 days to find something new. Carol said they'd been looking, but the market was impossible, which was true. I knew that, and that they needed somewhere to land while they sorted things out, just for a few months, 3 months at most. She has 2 children, my grandchildren. Theo was 8 at the time, and Lily was 5. What was I supposed to say? My house is a bungalow in a quiet part of Laval, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement. Gerald and I bought it in 1987. He died of a heart attack 7 years ago, and since then it had just been me and the cat and more square footage than I needed. I had the space. I told her yes. The first week was fine. It was almost nice, actually. The house had noise again, small shoes by the door, crayons on the kitchen table. Carol made spaghetti one night and we all ate together, and Theo sat beside me and told me about his class hamster for 20 minutes straight, and I thought, this is good. This is what family is supposed to feel like. By the 3rd week, Carol had rearranged the living room. She said the couch was at the wrong angle for the television. She moved the armchair I'd had by the window, the one I read in every morning with my coffee, to the corner behind the door, where it was basically unusable. When I mentioned it, she said, "It just makes more sense this way, Maman." She said it the way you say something to a child who doesn't understand geometry. I moved the chair back the next day. She moved it again the day after that. I let it go. Derek had been between opportunities since August, which was how Carol described it. He spent most of his days at the kitchen table on his laptop, doing things that generated a great deal of typing but no apparent income. Occasionally, he was on the phone in a low, serious voice about something I was never informed of. He drank the coffee I bought without replacing it. He used my car twice without asking, and once returned it with less gas than when he'd taken it. When I brought up the subject of rent gently, carefully, the way I'd been practicing in my head for 2 weeks, Carol looked at me like I'd asked for something unreasonable. "Derek is working on something," she said. "It's not a good time right now. Once things settle, we'll figure something out." I nodded. I told myself 3 months. 3 months came and went. By February, Derek had set up what he called his office in the room I used for sewing. My machine was pushed against the wall, unplugged. His monitor took up most of the table. I found my basket of unfinished projects in the garage, which had not been heated that winter. I work because I have to. Gerald's pension helps, but it doesn't stretch the way it used to. I'd gone back to part-time at Walmart 2 years before all this, just to have some extra coming in, to cover the property taxes and the little things that add up. When Carol's family moved in, those little things began to multiply. The hydro bills doubled almost immediately. 4 people showering, the television running until midnight, Derek's space heater in the sewing room. The grocery bills were something I tried not to calculate, because when I did, the number made my hands go cold. I was buying food for 4 extra people. Carol would occasionally pick something up, a bag of chips, a 2-liter of milk, and present it with an air of generosity that made me feel I should be grateful. I picked up more shifts at Walmart. The drive home on late nights was 25 minutes, and I would sit in the car in the driveway for a few minutes before going in. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed a moment that was completely mine before I walked into a house that no longer felt that way. One night in March, I came home at 11:15 to find that Carol had put Theo in my bedroom. She had put him in my bedroom. She said his bedroom was too cold and that he'd been having trouble sleeping, and my room was at the back of the house away from the street. Just for a few nights, she said. There was a camp cot set up in the hallway, with a pillow and one of my spare blankets. I stood in the hallway, 58 days into what was supposed to be a 3-month arrangement, wearing my work coat and smelling like the deli counter, and looked at the cot that was meant for me. E slept on it. I'm not sure, even now, why I didn't say something that night. There's a thing that happens when you've been giving and giving and giving, it becomes its own momentum. You've already said yes so many times that a single no feels like it would undo everything, collapse the whole careful structure you've built to keep the peace. So you say nothing. You fold yourself a little smaller. You sleep on a cot in the hallway of your own house. The weeks after that blurred together in a way that, looking back, I think was a kind of self-protection. I had my routines. Up before 6, coffee alone in the kitchen while everyone slept. Drive to work. Come home. Try not to notice the state of the kitchen. Try not to notice that Derek had started signing for packages with my address and his last name, as if a slow transfer of ownership was being conducted one Amazon delivery at a time. My friend Pauline noticed before I said anything. We'd been friends since our children were in École Primaire together, Pauline and I. She came for lunch one Saturday in April, and I watched her take in the living room, the moved furniture, Derek's mail stacked on my hall table, the children's things sprawled across every surface. She had a way of going quiet that said everything. "How long has this been going on?" she asked when we were in the kitchen, and I'd closed the door. I told her. The whole thing, from the phone call in October to the cot in the hallway to the grocery bills. I heard myself say it out loud for the first time, and I was surprised by how long the list was. Pauline put down her fork. She said, "Dorothy, you know this isn't normal." I said I knew. She said, "Do you? Because you're describing someone who's been slowly pushed out of her own house, and you're saying it like it's weather, like it's just a thing that happened to you." I didn't say anything. She said, "You need to talk to someone, not me, someone who can actually help you understand what your rights are." It was the word rights that stayed with me. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. It was my house. I'd lived in it for 36 years. Gerald and I had painted every room, replaced the roof twice, planted the lilac bushes by the front walk that still bloomed every May. And somehow, in the course of 6 months, I'd ended up in the hallway on a folding cot while my son-in-law used my sewing room as an office and signed for packages with a name that wasn't on the deed. I called a tenant lawyer. I almost hung up twice before someone answered. The woman I spoke to was patient and clear. She explained that in Quebec, even when family members are involved, certain protections still apply to a homeowner. She asked me if there was any written agreement. There wasn't. She asked if money had ever changed hands. It hadn't. She said the absence of a formal arrangement didn't mean I was without options. It meant we had to be careful about how we proceeded. The most important thing, she said, is that you stop accommodating before you start acting. No more adjustments. No more giving ground. I wrote that down. I kept it on a piece of paper folded in my wallet for the next 3 weeks. I want to tell you about the dinner in May, because that was the thing that made everything concrete for me. Carol had invited Derek's mother over without telling me. I found out when I came home from a Saturday shift, and there was a woman I'd met twice before sitting at my kitchen table, and the table had been set with my good dishes, the cream ones with the blue rim that had been my mother's, and something was on the stove that I hadn't bought and hadn't cooked. "We're having a nice dinner," Carol said when she saw my face. "Can you change quickly? Patricia doesn't like to eat late." I stood in my coat in my kitchen and looked at my mother's dishes and the stranger at my table who didn't like to eat late. I went upstairs. I didn't change. I came back down and I poured myself a glass of water and I said, very quietly, "Carol, can I speak with you in the hallway?" She came, a little annoyed, clearly not expecting anything. I said, "I'd like to know when you're planning to find another place to live." She blinked. "Maman, this isn't a good time." "It's a fine time," I said. "I'm asking you." She said they were still looking. She said the market was impossible. She said Derek was very close to closing something that would change things significantly. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this right now, right before dinner, in front of Patricia. Patricia was in the kitchen and couldn't hear us. "I'd like a date," I said. "An actual date." She gave me a look I hadn't seen since she was 16, the one that meant she thought I was being difficult. Then she went back into the kitchen, and the dinner happened, and I ate my mother's dishes and said very little, and afterward, when everyone was in the living room, I washed up alone. But something had shifted. I had said it out loud to her face, and she had heard me, even if she'd looked right through it. The letter came by registered mail in the second week of June. I'd worked with the lawyer on the wording. It stated clearly that the homeowner was requesting the property be vacated within 60 days. It outlined the legal basis. It offered no room for negotiation. Carol called me 7 minutes after she signed for it. She was crying, and then she was angry, and then she was crying again. She said I was abandoning my grandchildren. She said after everything they'd been through. She said Derek was right on the verge of something. She said she couldn't believe her own mother. I held the phone and looked out the window at the lilac bushes, which had already bloomed and gone for the year. I said, "You have 60 days, Carol. That's enough time to find something." She hung up. The next 2 months were not pleasant. Derek stopped making eye contact with me. Carol spoke to me in the clipped, careful way you speak to someone you're managing rather than someone you love. Theo was confused, and that was the part that cost me the most, watching him. Watch the adults with his uncertain eyes, too young to understand and old enough to feel it. I focused on the routines. Coffee before 6, work, come home. I gave them the space they needed to pack and make arrangements. I didn't apologize. I didn't retreat. They were gone by the second week of August. A rental in Blainville, not far, close enough for the children to still see me, which I'd been clear about with Carol, even in the hardest weeks of that summer. Whatever was between us, Theo and Lily were not part of it. The day they left, I stood in the living room after the last car had pulled out, and I just looked at it for a while. The armchair was back by the window, where it belonged. I moved it there myself, the same afternoon. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the chair. The house was very quiet, the way it had been before October, not empty, just still. My cat came and settled on the arm of the sofa and blinked at me. I thought about what Pauline had said, that I was describing it like weather, like something that had just happened to me. I understood what she meant now in a way I hadn't then. I hadn't woken up one day and decided to sleep on a cot in my own hallway. It had happened in increments, each small enough to seem manageable, until the accumulation was something I couldn't quite name or point to. That's how it works. You give a little, and then a little more, because each giving feels like love, or at least like keeping the peace, which can feel like the same thing when you're tired. And then one day you're 64 years old, driving home from a late shift, sitting in the driveway because the house you've lived in for 36 years doesn't feel like yours anymore. My rights, the lawyer had said. It was my house. Gerald and I had built a life in it, and I had let it become unrecognizable because I didn't know how to stop giving. Carol and I are in a careful place now. We talk on Sundays. She brought the children for Thanksgiving in October, and Theo helped me with the pie crust and got flour on my good tablecloth, and I didn't mind at all. Things are not repaired, not entirely, but they are not broken beyond repair either. That feels like the most honest way I can put it. What I want to say, if you're hearing this and something in it sounds familiar, is that recognizing it isn't a betrayal. Naming it doesn't make you a bad mother, or a bad grandmother, or a cold person. It makes you someone who finally stopped shrinking. The chair is by the window. The sewing machine is plugged in. The house is mine again. And I know I really know now what that means.